Hey y'all, welcome to a special edition of Psychedelic Book Club. Today we're going to talk about this awesome book written by Ken Nelson in 1983, Bufo Alvarius, The Psychedelic Toad of the Sonoran Desert. Some of you are probably familiar with Hamilton Morris. He makes this awesome show called Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, and it has a lot of psychedelics and other substances and gets really heavy into the chemistry side of things, but it's also like a really good documentary, really good show on Vice. And I saw the episode about Bufo Alvarius. Shortly after I saw that episode, I saw an Instagram post from Hamilton Morris, and he was posting about this book. They were reprinting this book made originally in the 80s, and the funds that they make from the book were going to go in toward preserving the Bufo Alvarius toad. So yeah, I ordered it as soon as I saw it on Instagram, and it came with this nice little book, and it also came with this cool little mini poster bookmark thing. It says, "Please leave toads alone." So super cool. I'm glad I got it. It took a while to get it, and I think it is limited edition, so I'm not sure if you will be able to get another copy of that, but I will share with you guys what it has. So this book was originally made in 1983 by a guy named Ken Nelson, but he kept his identity a secret for a while, as you'll see if you watch the episode about this on Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, and he produced this book under the name Albert Most. So it was actually due to Hamilton looking into this that they found the real identity of this guy near the end of his life, which he passed away very recently. So Ken Nelson was an independent researcher and environmental activist from Denton, Texas. So another Texan, represent. And his environmental activism plays a big role later. So how all this started was Ken in 1981 read an article about the Bufo Alvarius toad, which triggered his interest. In the article, they actually speculated about the possible use by the Cherokee indigenous population in America. This was actually later proved to be not true, but it still sparked Ken's interest nonetheless. Ken read about the DMT that is in this specific toad's venom. So naturally, Ken went to go investigate. He went to Arizona in 1983 and smoked the toad venom. He's the first known human being to do so. How interesting is it that this natural psychedelic, which also happens to be like the most potent hallucinogen known to man, was not utilized by humans until the 1980s. I think that's kind of crazy, actually. So I'm going to read you a little section about what happens after he smokes the toad venom and comes back to Texas. Upon returning to Texas, Ken wrote and published this pamphlet under the pseudonym Albert Most as part of his coursework in a technical writing class. The iconic illustrations were drawn by his friend and fellow student Gail Patterson. With the help of a few co-conspirators, Ken personally distributed the pamphlets at rainbow gatherings and other underground events, and then retreated from the public eye. That's an interesting course to take, because don't you think if you were the person that discovered 5-MeO-DMT was smokable and you could just harvest it from toads, don't you think you would go and tell quite a few people, and it would probably go viral and things like that? So it's almost could have only happened in this time. Ken's identity was actually not revealed until very close to the end of his life, and this was due to growing concerns over misrepresentations of his work, and of course his concerns for the habitat and the toads themselves, because as more and more people discovered this toad, they're being over-harvested. It's the same problem with peyote. So in the new edition of this book, they actually have a section at the end that's dedicated to producing 5-MeO-DMT synthetically and in a sustainable way as to not have to harvest the toads. Alright, so I'm going to give you my highlights of this book, part 1 of the book. The Sonoran Desert is a desert that's located in the southwest United States, kind of covering some parts of Arizona and northern Mexico and around that area. It is the native home of Bufo Alvarius, the DMT toad, or the DM toad. The toad is naturally nocturnal and it buries itself underground during the day to avoid the extreme heat, which can get up to about 140 degrees. Then they also come out at night and in wet areas to mate. And their mating season is between May and July. So usually that's the time of year when people would go harvest them. The toad's body is covered with these glands on its neck and on its limbs, and this is what produces the 5-MeO-DMT. The venom itself is actually about 15% 5-MeO-DMT. So in the book they mention how 5-MeO-DMT was synthesized in 1939, and it wasn't really realized until later that cultures in South America had been using plants that contain 5-MeO-DMT as part of their shamanic cultures. 5-MeO-DMT is about 10 times more potent by weight than the regular form of DMT that we're familiar with. And DMT is famously known as one of the strongest, if not the strongest, psychedelics known to mankind. At that time, and even up until recently, as recent as 2011, 5-MeO-DMT was so unknown that it actually wasn't made illegal until about 11 years ago. It used to be available as just a research chemical that you could get online. Part 2 talks about how you can actually collect the venom from the toad. A toad can produce up to a gram of venom, which turns into 75 milligrams of 5-MeO-DMT. And so 3 to 5 milligrams is all you need for this DMT to be psychoactive, or that's about 2 to 3 heroic doses for one human. The next thing it talks about is how to smoke the venom. It says you need to scrape the dried venom off of the glass into a one-hitter pipe and make sure that it has a brass screen or some kind of screen. You also want to make sure that this pipe is dedicated only to 5-MeO-DMT. You don't want to be smoking weed out of that thing later and then have a DMT flash. So you smoke the bowl in one hit and you hold it in as long as you can. So I'll read another part of the book that describes what happens once you smoke the toad. Within 30 seconds, there will be an onset of almost overwhelming psychedelic effects. You will be completely absorbed in a complex chemical event characterized by an overload of thoughts and perception, brief collapse of the ego, and loss of the space-time continuum. Relax, breathe regularly, and flow with the experience. After 2 to 3 minutes, the initial intensity fades to a pleasant LSD-like sensation, in which visual illusions, hallucinations, and perceptual distortions are common. You may sense or notice the world shrinking or expanding. You may notice that colors seem brighter and more beautiful than usual, and most likely you will experience a euphoric mood interspersed with bursts of unmotivated laughter. This ineffable episode is of extremely short duration. The hallucinogenic effects dissipate rapidly, and the entire psychedelic cycle is completed within 15 minutes. There is no hangover or harmful effect. On the contrary, a pleasant psychedelic afterglow appears quite regularly and may last several hours to several days after smoking the venom of Bufo Alvarius, the psychedelic toad of the Sonoran Desert. That's just so badass. And then for that section, they have a little drawing. It's pretty cool. So yeah, the book itself is actually pretty short. So I want to add some very important considerations if you're someone who is interested in trying this. I would seriously urge you not to seek out the toads and harvest them, because they are already being over-harvested, and we could not only risk extincting this beautiful psychedelic toad, but we could also damage their habitat, which they play a crucial ecological role in. So I'm going to read you some important considerations from the book. It says, every psychedelic experience is chiefly a function of set and setting, of preparation and environment. The better prepared you are, the better the experience will be for you. Consider the following instructions. Smoke the venom fairly early in the day on an empty but not starving stomach. Do not drink any alcohol or take any drugs or medication prior to smoking the venom. Provide a comfortable setting which is as free as possible from unforeseen distractions and intrusions. Make sure you'll not be disturbed for at least 30 minutes. Be comfortably seated or prone prior to inhaling the vapors, and enjoy your trip. So in the new published edition of the book, Hamilton Morris added a section at the end of the book where he's talking about the entire process of synthesizing 5-MeO-DMT. So it's like that meme or that filter on Instagram where you're like looking around and you see all this math going. If you've ever seen an episode of Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, you know that he like gets nitty gritty with the chemistry, and he's like, here, let me just read some of it and I'll do it super fast to like sound like Hamilton. Maybe add a little vocal fry. 100 grams of methoxytryptamine, 0.5264 moles, is poured into a 10-liter 3-neck reaction kettle nested inside a 3.5-liter ice bath. With magnetic stirring, the tryptamine is dissolved in 4.5 liters of MeOH, forming a translucent brown solution. The bath is filled with pellets of dry ice, followed by MeOH, and the 5-methoxytryptamine solution is allowed to cool until it's reached 0 degrees Celsius. So it's like 5 pages of that, which is super cool. So if you're into chemistry, I would recommend doing that. Wait, no, I don't recommend doing that. You didn't hear that from me. But in the end, Hamilton does say, if you're a chemist, about $1,000 worth of supplies and equipment can produce enough 5-MeO-DMT to change the lives of up to 7,000 people. He says this as an encouragement not to sell 5-MeO-DMT for multiple reasons. For one, the life-changing experience that you'd be giving people is very ample payback. And two, this stuff is a Schedule 1 substance, and it's a huge felony if you're caught producing it or selling it. So I would not recommend getting in trouble like that. So the fact that this is Schedule 1 and so illegal is obviously idiotic and outdated. The war on drugs has been a complete failure. A lot of us know this, especially due to the positive, extremely positive impact that psychedelics can have in our lives. Just ask Mike Tyson.
I'd like you to explain the toad to me.
Do you understand the toad?
Is it like ayahuasca?
No, it takes you to another level. Ayahuasca is nothing compared to this.
Is it called DMT?
Yes.
I would also like to add, for anyone trying this, please be as cautious as possible and do not mix substances. Make sure you have someone who's experienced, who's watching over you. People have been known to die from this substance, but not the substance by itself. It's usually in combination with other drugs, or you can vomit while you're having the experience, so you might become asphyxiated and choke on your own vomit. So you want to make sure you can lay on your side to properly vomit, and all these things will help you have the safest trip possible, and we can avoid any unnecessary deaths. So in the episode of Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, at the end, they show Hamilton talking at an event that's dedicated to the Bufo Alvarius toad. In his speech at this event, he advocates for the use of synthetic 5-MeO-DMT to avoid over-harvesting the toad. Now, as you can imagine, this was probably not extremely well received at an event dedicated to the toad. People want to smoke the toad specifically. And it brings up the issue of people not willing to do this and use the synthetic version because they insist that there is something different. Like when you smoke it from the toad as opposed to the lab, there's something more spiritual, or the spirit of the toad is within it. I can sympathize with these ideas of animism and, plants being intelligent and things like that, but if we're at risk of extincting the toad, then that means nobody is going to be able to experience this spirit. If there is any difference, it's impossible to tell from the outside, and it seems likely that it's more in our heads, and that's part of the set and setting that goes towards this. So I'm kind of agnostic on this issue, but I do think that we are very stubborn about wanting to stick to things that are quote unquote natural when nature, everything in nature is natural. Yeah, separate subject for a different day, but basically it should be the real thing. And another good example of this is that, you know, Maria Sabina was the famous mushroom priestess from Mexico, and she gave the first Americans their first psilocybin experience. And so later on, Albert Hofmann, the man who synthesized LSD, he actually created some of the first psilocybin pills. They brought these pills back to Maria Sabina to try and get her to verify it. And you know what she said? She confirmed that the spirit of the mushroom was within this synthetic version. So I feel like if Sabina and OG shamaness could have this view, then we can adapt to this view when it comes to the toad. So please leave the toads alone. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you learned something from it. I personally have never tried 5-MeO DMT, but I'm insanely curious about it, and it sounds kind of like the peak of all psychedelic trips. So I kind of want to work my way up to that too, having never tried the other DMT. So with that said, it's crazy to me that this is produced by a toad. And the fact that such a potent psychedelic can be produced from toad venom, to me, lends credence to the idea that we can produce DMT in the human brain. It doesn't seem as far-fetched to think that, considering that this toad venom is 15% 5-MeO DMT. So if you've had an experience with 5-MeO DMT, please feel free to share. Fire away in the comments. I always love hearing other people's trip reports. That's going to be it for this video. Hope y'all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.